Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Suick Seminar Series, episode number 2. We are featuring the usual suspects. My name is John Anderson. I'm the owner of the Ottawa River Muskie Factory. We have Lisa Goodyear, head guide at the Ottawa River Muskie Factory, and we have Brent Bocek, the owner of Fish NV Guide Service, as well as Noah Oliveira Hill. Noah, if you want to come on and say a quick hello. Noah's joined our team recently. He's here to take some of the technical load off of Lisa, as well as do whatever we tell him to do. So thanks for being here, Noah.
Yeah, thank you, John. Glad to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this upcoming season.
Me too. All right. Tonight's episode, we will be joined by two special guests. We're going to be joined by fourth generation owner of the Suick Lure Company, Mike Suick himself, and the Pipestone Princess, Jessie Baker, producer of some phenomenal social media and some really great videos. I'm sure you've seen her if you're part of the muskie community. Tonight's episode is mainly focused on presentations. We will talk about jerkbaits. We'll talk about soft plastics, swimbaits, glidebaits, and topwaters. That covers just about everything that you're going to use or you're going to need while you're out there. It's all transferable knowledge. And so if you like baits other than Suicks, you can take what we teach you and apply it to those baits. But you'll learn from us that we're all Suick first people. And that's learned through, I think I added up over 80 years of experience on the water between the group that we have here tonight. And so we'll tell you why we like Suicks. We'll talk about modifications that we use as well as the presentation. So, yeah, Mike's also we're gonna start the show before we get to the presentation portion of what we're doing. We're gonna talk about the history of the Suick Lure Company, which is in fact the history of jerkbait fishing for muskie. Suick being the first jerkbait in the muskie world. It is a fascinating story, much more interesting than just going through the history of it. We've got some great pictures to show you from that. Jessie's going to join us probably halfway through the show, depending on how fast we talk, maybe the 30 or 40 minute mark. She's going to give us, show us an awesome video. She's going to give us a short presentation on how she likes to use Suicks, and she's designed some custom colors for Suick, which we'll talk about those, and that will spawn an interesting, hopefully interesting conversation on colors in general. On what works in clear water, in stained water, in dirty water, on cloudy days, and in sunny days. And you want a different presentation. You want to be presentation specific for all of those days. And so, as usual, we encourage you to be interactive. We have people watching on Facebook and on YouTube tonight. Wherever you are, send in your questions. We will pick out questions and introduce them into the show after we talk about each of the different types of baits that we have. The last 20 minutes of the show, after Jessie's done talking on colors, will just be an open discussion where your questions will drive us on where we go and what we do. And so fasten up, buckle up, buddies. We're gonna go right now. So if you want to bring Mike, the man himself, Mike Suick, in. Hey, Mike. Nice.
How's it going, John?
Fantastic. Nice to see you again. A pleasure. Yeah. Why don't you start us off with a synopsis of the history of Suick, and then we'll get to some of the pictures that you brought along.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me, John. Story starts out in the mid 1930s. Frank was my great grandpa. He was an avid muskie fisherman, but at that time they really weren't using a lot of baits. It was mostly sucker type fishing. He also owned a trout hatchery. That was kind of a side job that he had. And he noticed that when a trout was, injured or dying or about to, it would, flutter down and rise back up, and they would attract the attention of the other fish. So he kind of got the idea for the Suick, and it didn't happen overnight. I mean, he tried different designs, he was making them all with a knife, by hand. So he came up with a design that he liked. and he would ride the train from here in Antigo up to Pelican Lake. It's about a 30-mile run. So back then, that was quite a trip. So we'd rent a boat from a resort right off the train tracks there and try out the lure. And it actually, at first, it had a wood tail. Most people don't realize that it wasn't always metal. That was a mistake. He cut the wood tail off by mistake and put a metal tail on to try to fix it, and then realized the adjustability he had with that. So that's where the metal tail came in. And so that happened through, the mid 1930s. 1939 is the year that we say we were started as a company. Frank also owned a tavern here in Antigo. So as things got going and he got more well-known with the lure, people would come in and, want to talk to him about it. And that's kind of how the first sales would happen. They'd sell him over the bar, or he would, people would travel to Antigo and want to see some of his catches. And that's, where that kind of started. And that just kept gaining traction. It was all word of mouth back then. So the bar is really where it grew its legs and turned into kind of what it is today. And Frank was, active in it for quite a while. My grandpa and his brother came in the 1950s, and my dad bought out my grandpa, I apologize, my Uncle Jim in 1980. And the two of them, my dad and grandpa, ran it together until basically the time I came, which was about 2010. And then my dad retired just a few years ago.
And you've been involved in this since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, right?
I was, yeah, till I left for school, yeah.
I love the fact that that the original Suicks were designed on something that attracts fish, a wounded bait fish, and just mimicking that. It's a very natural presentation. And so for me, all Suicks, the Suick, the Thriller hasn't changed a lot over the years, and all it's ever done is catch fish. The same design, the same mimicking of that wounded bait fish, and it was productive then, and it works just as well in today's world. So
yes,
fantastic.
So Mike, you've owned the company for how many years now?
I've been a part owner for, I don't know, 5 or 6, I would say.
Right.
And within the last year, I became the owner.
Okay. So, but there was a time frame where you left and went to school.
I did. Yeah. I moved to Green Bay. It's about 90 miles from here. And I went to school for automotive. Graduated there in 2008 and worked down in Green Bay for a few years and ended up coming back to Antigo.
Then you were lured back.
Yeah.
Pun intended. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, one thing I find quite interesting is everybody calls it a Suick, right? But really, it's a Suick Thriller. Like the original one was called a Thriller, and but it's just kind of like like a brand name, right? Everybody just calls it a Suick.
I mean, even just the last show we were at a couple of weeks ago, I had a person come into the booth and he wasn't sure. He was looking for a Thriller, but he thought maybe a Suick. He wasn't quite sure of the difference. And I just had to explain to him it's the same thing. It's just people know it as a Suick.
Yeah.
You brought along some historical pictures that we're going to pop up and show you, including one that, I had heard the story decades ago about a petition. When your great grandfather Frank first came out with the Suicks, he didn't share that with the people on Pelican Lake, and they watched him catch a lot of fish. And as musky fishermen tend to be, they were quite jealous of what was going on, and so they actually had everybody on the lake sign a petition, and it was sent to the Wisconsin DNR. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So this is a pretty rarely seen document here, John. In fact, I've only saw it myself a few months ago. So this is when things were starting to get going. So late 30s, early 40s. Kind of started off as a joke. Everybody noticed that he was catching a ton of fish on Pelican, and they formed up a petition to send to the DNR, and it kind of gained some traction, and that turned into a real thing. And then so these are all the original signatures that they sent in, back then, and they were serious.
So they wanted the lure banned unless it was shared with them. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Fantastic. And that was the origin of the company, was a lot of people blackmailing or forcing your great grandfather Frank to show them how he's catching so many fish. So
yeah, a lot of people weren't very happy he was doing so good.
Fantastic. That's a picture of Frank, I guess.
Yes, that's Frank there. That's one of his biggest fish, just over 50 inches, and that one actually hangs here at the factory. We've still got that mount.
Cool.
It's been redone a handful of times, but it's still here.
Do you have the bait that it was caught on?
No, no.
All right. Next picture. What do you got, Lisa?
So this is one of the first pictures we have here of any kind of shop. This was down in Frank's basement. That's Frank on the right, kind of looking at the bait, checking the nose, and that's my grandpa Pete next to him. So he was just a kid, and I don't know if you can see, there's a sander right behind him. We still have that sander here today. We still use that.
Wow.
Fantastic. Next picture. What do you have, Lisa? Okay.
So here's a musky head display. This actually, I'm not really exactly sure where this picture was taken, but the musky head display was in Frank's bar. It was said that he had the largest musky head display in the world. And that unfortunately burnt down, and I'm not sure that many of those heads survived.
Just amazing for anybody who's a new age muskie fisherman. Muskie people were the first ones to support catch and release, going back to the late 60s and the early 70s, because taking muskies out of a system just means less muskies for everybody to catch. And so in the old days, displaying your muskie heads was a way of showing your muskie prowess. And I started guiding in the mid 70s in Northern Ontario in a little town called Manaki. And I can still remember going around in the boat, and there were various lodges. We didn't see them on the side of a shack or in the bar so much, but every lodge would proudly display muskie heads on the trees. There would be something to show that they were really serious and committed to muskies, and they were prodigious muskie producers. So something out of yesteryear. Just glad we don't do it anymore, but it was a part of muskie fishing lore for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And interesting to see.
That's actually a picture of the bar, the inside of the bar. There aren't very many of these either. So that is Frank, my grandpa Jim and John, or my grandpa John and Jim. And I'm not sure who the fourth person is. We haven't identified him yet, but that's.
So you say your grandpa John, but everybody called him Pete, you were saying before.
Yes, his name was John, but everybody called him Pete.
Why was that? Any idea?
I think it was because they had Jim and John, and there was just too many J's, so his middle name was Pete, and they started calling him Pete. Okay,
good enough. Pretty much a perfect life. Making musky lures, you own a bar, and you head up to Pelican Lake. And what else is there really?
I don't think much.
Fantastic. So that's a quick synopsis of the history of Suick, how it was, the origins of the company, and from there, just on a great trajectory. So let's move on and talk about different baits that you manufacture. The first one that came out, the original jerkbait, the Suick Thriller. So we have floating Suicks, we have weighted Suicks, we have the new Franken Suicks, which are extra large Suicks with a weighted system. What do you want to tell us? What do you have to say about thrillers from your end?
Well, the unweighted is what came out first. They were all unweighted when they first came out. We added the weighted series later on. And now in recent years, we started with the 14, like you mentioned, but we also have custom weighted all the way down to 9-inch. So people can customize the weight, on their own. Typically, like a weighted one, it still rises just at a little bit of a slower pace than a non-weighted. But with that custom weighted, you can weight them down real heavy. So you can count them down. You can weight them so that they're neutral. You can get them so that they barely rise. You can make them stand on their head. Stuff you could do with a Suick you never were able to do in the past.
Fantastic. What do you sell more of, weighted or non-weighted?
I would say we probably sell twice as many weighted as we do non-weighted.
Okay.
And yet they both have their place, right? The weighted and the non-weighted, they both have their place in the fishery.
They do, yeah. I mean, unweighted are probably used more over the top of weed beds, stuff like that, where you just want to keep them real near the surface. Weighted ones more rock type structure, deeper drop offs. That.
Yeah, I'm a weighted Suick guy myself. I like bending the tail and getting them down to 4 or 5 feet, and just your fish are hitting that bait on the paws. And one of the prettiest strikes, Jessie's got a video later on. One of the prettiest strikes that you can get in the muskie world is that Suick floating up. And it floats up when you have it weighted just right. It floats up slowly. It's got a shimmy to it, and it's often got a curl. And that bait is fishing on its own while you're doing nothing with it. All that action is really appealing to a fish and a real trigger on its own.
That's usually when they get hit, is right there.
Yeah, it's almost always on the paws. Interestingly, it's almost always on the front hook or the middle hook as well.
Yeah. So just come into it head on.
Yeah, if a muskie tries to hit a bait in the head, because if you get a hold of the tail, the fish has a good chance of getting away. It's just natural predator instinct. And so a headshot is what every fish aims for. And muskies are so good at 9 out of 10 times hitting a bait in the very front end, or as Jessie will show you in her video, maybe even a little too far forward on the front of the lure. A couple of features that I really like on Suick thrillers is the metal tail. The purpose of the metal tail was so that you can bend it, and that adjusts your dive angle. So if you want to get the bait down a little bit deeper, but for me, that's always been like a strobe light. As that bait rises slowly and shimmies, especially on a sunny day, the sun shining on that is just, you see it, just that light just popping off of it. And in the fish world, what one fish wants is what another fish has. And so it's looking like somebody feeding, or it's looking like the shine off of the scales of a bait fish. And so both of those are just natural triggers to go along with the wounded fish action of the bait rising up on the surface. And so another great feature. Lisa, you were talking about how loud the hooks were on a Suick last week.
Yeah, so a lot of people wouldn't think about this, but we actually like to fish them in the dark as well. Not only, especially like the Franken Suick, does it displace a ton of water, which of course at that point they're hunting with their lateral line. But every time you pull it, just think about what that sound is underwater. It's very loud.
Another thing with the tail, John, obviously, like you're saying, you get a lot of flash off it. Obviously, the more you bend it to an extent, the deeper to go, because water's catching on that and making the bait dive down. Also, when you're done pulling, that tail, that resistance on that tail will actually help stop the bait so before it rises. So after your pull, that'll help it stop so it doesn't just keep gliding and make a nice little rise there when you're going to get hit.
Fantastic. Got any modifications, guys, on what you do with the thriller?
I might have one or two. Go ahead, Lisa.
Mike, how about Mike?
Just a quick one I wanted to touch on while you were talking about the tuning, John, because that's probably one of the questions I get the most from customers on the boat is how do I tune this thing? And for me, mostly right out of the package, I make a very tiny tweak, as you said, the tail down. It's really important that it's even, because if it's off to one side or the other, it kind of changes the action a little bit. And sometimes that's not even a bad thing, because if it kicks to the side, that tends to trigger fish as well. But for me, I like it running pretty straight. So if you find after, multiple fish, you're having a hard time tuning it, obviously, because in the net, the tail gets bent a lot by the thrashing fish. One thing I find is if I'm having trouble just tuning it with the tail, I'll throw a split ring on the front. And that often helps me get back the original action that I have with the bait.
Really good points, because your Suick does get pretty beat up. The more beat up they are, the better. I hand people a lot of lures that are just the paint is all rubbed off of them. And so, yeah, that's the bait that you want, because the fish have rubbed all the paint off of the lure, and whatever it is about that bait, it's right. So, we've all seen Suicks that have no paint that are just, and they still catch fish. And so use that bait. If that bait works, use it until it doesn't work anymore. Use it until it's a toothpick.
One thing you can do too is sometimes, when, like Lisa said, when they get in the net, that the tail really takes a beating. Sometimes you get one you just cannot get to come back into tune. You can actually rotate the front hook 180 degrees so that instead of having two barbs on one side and one on the other, you flip it, and that throws a little bit of weight to the other side, and that will bring it back into tune real fast.
All right.
That's interesting. That's something I've never done.
That's, a lot of people don't know that trick, but that one works 9 times out of 10.
What about the plastic thrillers? Can you talk about the plastic thrillers? That's something that you introduced 8 years ago?
Yeah, I think over 10 almost. Time flies.
Everything's further back than I thought.
I know. So the plastic are real similar to the wood. They're a little bit less buoyant, so that the original ones were not technically weighted, but they rise a little bit slower than a non-weighted lure would anyway. So it runs a little bit more like a weighted would, just naturally. We make them custom weighted now too, but that's the characteristic of the plastic. The shape of the head is a little bit different as well. There's a little bit more slant to it, so that gives it more side-to-side action.
Mm-hmm.
So yep. It's not so blunt. It's got some slants. And then what that also does too is the more you bend the tail down, it starts working against the head of the bait, and that gives you more side to side. So you can adjust if you want more or less by where you put the tail.
I find on the plastic on the right, it has almost a little bit of shimmy too.
It does, yeah. And they're all exactly the same. I mean, the wood is different because it's wood. There's just different characteristics to it, but the plastic ones are super consistent.
Brent, you've got a weighting modification that you like.
Yeah, so just before I get there, another thing you got to watch for, especially after it's been in the net, right? Sometimes that nose will get bent a little bit, the screw eye there. And sometimes just adjusting that one way or the other will straighten that bait out too if it's kicking off to one side.
Yep, absolutely.
So especially when the water gets cold, say under 55 degrees, and that hang time is what always gets hit. There's a weight on there. I don't know if you can see that very well. And that's about a 1/4 ounce weight. So when I pull that through the water, it dives down. The bait's on that slack line. As I'm reeling up the slack line, that bait will rise and actually sit there neutral buoyant because of the weight of the in front of the leader. So sometimes I'll put a rubber core sinker on. This one here, there's actually a hole in the weight itself, and then I have a bobber stop on there. You can see that. So that seems to work pretty good. And as I said, that water gets cold, you can work this bait a lot slower, and you can have it hang right there, neutral buoyant. So with that weight, I can probably get this down 4 or 5 feet, and then the bait comes up and just hangs there and doesn't move. And it's quite interesting because we always talk about speed and triggering a strike. This is probably one of the very few baits out there that actually gets hit when it's sitting still. But you got to move it and then have it hit still for it to get hit.
Mm-hmm.
Good points. The bow check modification. All right. Well done. Maybe we just talk about different retrieve options with the jerkbait. And so one thing I find as a guide is that musky fishermen are really repetitious. They only know one speed to fish, generally super fast, and they work their jerkbaits no matter what it is, no matter what the conditions, the same way. And they keep it going. And so I encourage people, especially at the start of the day, until you find out if the fish are aggressive or non-aggressive, vary your retrieves. If your fish are really aggressive, then you want a very fast retrieve. You want something that's continually pumping. You want to appeal to that energy and that action. Your fish will move. Your fish will chase baits. The less your fish are on, the more neutral their mood, or especially if they're in a negative mood. Now you're looking at really getting your bait close to a fish. You're looking at something that's very slow, very vulnerable. That fish isn't going to move 8 or 10 feet to hit a bait, but might move 4, might move 2. And so matching your presentation to the fish's mood is a way, and varying your speeds on retrieves until you find out the ideal retrieve for a day, I think is really good advice. Hope it's good advice for people. Anybody else got anything on presentations?
Yeah, quite often when I'm working one, my rod tip will probably move 7 feet or so on the swing, on the sweep. And then you're always moving it with your rod tip. I never move the bait with the reel itself, always with the rod. And that really pays off for me. Every now and then I'll throw a cast in there where I'm popping it, maybe a foot or so. You know, pop reel, pop reel, pop reel, pop reel. And sometimes, especially around weed beds, that'll create a strike.
Awesome.
So that's something I picked up years ago watching an in-fisherman video when they were throwing Suick. So I'm going, what are they doing? They're not working it right. Next thing you know, they catch a fish, and now I'm thinking, you know what? There's actually no wrong way to move it. As long as you're moving that bait through the water and get that little bit of a pause somewhere in there.
Yeah, there's really probably one thing that I've noticed the most is people just tend to overwork it. You just don't need to. You don't need to go super fast all the time, and you don't need to jerk like crazy on it. I mean, it can be a soft working bait too.
I find it's a bait that somebody who hasn't really musky fished before, they can pull it, reel up that slack, pull it, reel up that slack. And as long as they got it moving through the water, it's that hang time that's really creating the strike.
Right.
We like to give it to people who get in our boats, both Lisa and I at first, because it floats and you don't know how good a guest is with the bait caster. And so last thing you want is a cast out with something that sinks and then they hand you a bird's nest. And so then you got a bird's nest and a snag to undo. We just want to undo the bird's nest. So guide tip to the other guides out there. Start with a floating lure. I'll just throw out one last presentation, and this is a tip of the hat to Todd Leopardi from the Leo Lure Company. When we were fishing a Can-Am Muskie event, they used to have Muskies Inc. and Muskies Canada used to have mutual events every other year. It was in Canada or it was in the States. And so we were fishing on Pigeon Lake, which is in the Kawarthas, our lake in Canada. Naturally, we as Canadians won because it's our home water and we just knew it better. But I was watching this guy I didn't know at the time, Todd Leopardi, and he was working a jerkbait more aggressively than I'd ever seen. He was just pumping it all the way back to the boat and never stopped, just hyper aggressive. And I got to fish around him over the course of several days, and I watched him catch several fish on that presentation. And so that's one that I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't have introduced into my repertoire unless I'd seen Todd use it. And it works really well with a Suick. If Brian Osborne is out there watching, showed it to him. Brian is one of Suicks are the only lure as a guide that I have had people show up. I had a guy show up from Pennsylvania once with 2 tackle boxes. He opened them up. I said, "What's that?" He said, "That's every color Suick ever made, John." So he only fished Suicks. Brian Osborne only fishes Suicks. It's the only bait I've had people that is their one and only go-to. And so tip of the hat to Todd and something he taught me about jerkbait fishing. Let's move on to soft plastics.
Real quick before we go, John, we actually had a really great question. Timothy is asking, can we discuss typical rod and reel setups?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Me personally, I use an 8'6" extra heavy with like a 5.4 to 1 gear ratio reel. Brent, what do you use?
I use an 8.6, but I go a little higher gear ratio just so I can pick up that line quicker.
Okay.
And as I said, you're never moving the bait with the reel, right? Only with the rod. But that slack line, I want to be able to pick that up quickly. So I go with a little higher gear ratio.
Okay.
That's an interesting question because in the old days, jerkbait rods were the last ones to get longer. And the musky world rods have gotten longer year by year by year. They've allowed us to catch more fish because you can finish better at the side of the boat. But the jerkbait rod was typically 5.5 or 6 feet long and a real steady action off the bat. In our boat, I think Lisa and I are both 8.6 minimum. And just again, for finishing, we've gone to 9.5 or 10-foot rods. Those work really well for us. You're just adjusting the length that the rod tip is moving. And again, I like to use the line, especially for my Americans in the boat. We're fishing for Canadian size muskies. Big fish can't do sharp circles. And so, big long rod allows bigger circles, allows you to catch more fish at the side of the boat.
I do like heavier action rods though versus like a medium heavy. I don't think you actually need to because of the weight of the lure, but from what we've seen is you lose fewer fish with a heavier action rod.
Yeah, absolutely. I go with the heavy action rods as well. The 2 fail points as a guide are on finishing at the side of the boat, and so the big rod is making that less of a fail point. The other fail point is the hook sets. We have teeth on baits almost every day. It's not every day that we put we put fish in the boat. There are days where you don't catch muskies when you go muskie fishing. And so having a stiffer rod alleviates that problem with the hook set. And so absolutely, the heavy rod is the way to go.
And just touching on rods a lot of people use different manufacturers for the rods, of course. And the difference between a heavy and an extra heavy can vary between manufacturers too.
Okay. The heavier, the better in general.
Yep.
Let's go on to soft plastics, which in the Suick world is a curly Sue. I know Brent and I both love curly Sues. I've got one.
We've even sung a song about them out in the boat.
We sing a lot of songs out in the boat. Very badly, but if they're working, you got to keep singing them, right? And so
it's all about a PMA. Positive monkey attitude when you're out there.
Yeah.
That's right.
Curly Sue with the tail. And that tail is what catches the fish. It's amazing. You give this to different people and everybody does something a little bit different with it. No matter what you do, the action of the tail on this bait is what catches the fish, no matter how you're using it. And so muskies have it's one of the few baits that is good all the time. Soft plastics and this tail and that action will catch active fish. It'll trigger inactive fish and bringing it in slow. We talked about the Jersey retrieve on the last program. I won't go over that again, but I like to cast these out, especially for non-aggressive fish, and reel it in slow and let the tail do the work for you. Maybe the standard retrieve with a curly Sue would be the same as the jerkbait retrieve. Most people, it's the pull, pause. And so that bait is pulling forward, sinking just a little bit, ripping forward again, sinking a little bit, and it's pull, pause. And then when you go to pull, that weight is there. Again, that fish is hit that bait while it's at rest. You know, if they're in behind it, chasing it, the bait is stopping, they're catching up to it, you're forcing them to make that purchase decision. It's on the pause that the fish is hitting. So really terrific. Maybe one other retrieve I'll touch on is Lake St. Clair. People on Lake St. Clair love to fish. You have a maximum depth of about 18 feet in Lake St. Clair. And so they love to cover the water column. And so casting this bait out, letting it sink down, and then big rips so that you're sinking it down to maybe 12 or 14 feet, ripping it up to 4 or 5, letting it sink back down and ripping it up, letting it sink back down. And again, while this bait is sinking down, the tail is in full effect and is a trigger all on its own. And so, you know, different techniques for using the curly suit. Any favorites out there?
I really like ripping it because with the thriller, you get that dive and that slow rise. Here it's jumping up when you give it that pull, and then it's giving a nosedive on the fall, right? So you can work. I love working jerkbait, so it's kind of just like working a jerkbait there, but I'm getting a different action on it. And the same with the Susie sucker.
Is that your favorite color that you happen to have in?
That is one of my favorite colors because I've caught some really nice fish on it.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite color. And so if you're just going to have one, that's the one to have. So.
How about you, Lisa?
Yeah, you guys pretty well covered it there. We've got a bunch of great questions coming in. I'm just going to say we're going to touch on those later. We have some questions about color. There's one here though that I really want to put Mike on the spot on. Dean wants to know: are there any new lure categories in development?
No, I wouldn't say there's any new categories in development. We're always trying to put, different twists on things and, certain modifications here and there, but nothing as far as a new category.
Not a new category, but that boat check guy, he's been working on some with you. The cat's out of the bag. I know maybe you guys didn't want to talk about this, but I don't know. Do we have that video coming up a little bit later?
No.
Okay. Okay. Brent was that recently speaking at, what was that? The
Toronto Boat Show.
Toronto Boat Show, and got to stand up and demonstrate in a tank. And I watched the demonstration that he was doing. That was a wobble. We'll talk about the glides in a moment, but a differently weighted wobble, and I had to do double take. That thing was so erratic. So we'll wait a moment or two until we get to the wobbles and the glide baits, but we'll tell you about that in a moment or two.
Or maybe on soft plastics. Next up on the soft plastics, we go to the Swimbaits, the Susie sucker. Quick comment on the Susie sucker. A basic trigger for that bait for me is that muskie's eyes are on the top of their head, and they are a strike up fish. They're an ambush predator, but they're basically looking up. There's great videos of them taking stuff off the bottom, but it's an awkward pick. It's pinning something on the bottom. For the most part, it's the muskie looking up. And so when you're looking up at a Susie sucker, you see the shape of a sucker, and you see that tail, that swim bait tail, moving just like a sucker would be swimming. And so one of my favorite baits, I'm not a young person going out to catch muskies. I like everything to be easier, technique, equipment. And so the small size Susie sucker, a perfect bait for me, especially when fish are inactive. I got to thank Brent for introducing me to that when we were out filming one of the TV shows that we put together with you. When the fish were inactive.
when the fish were inactive, and didn't we catch fish when we were inactive on it?
We did.
So just a real easy bait to use. Let's see if I have one here. I
Just
don't have one of the small ones here, but oh yeah, I do. No, I don't. I know I don't.
I just want to mention that if we don't get to anybody's questions while we're live here, we'll definitely get to answer them online for people later if we don't get to them while we're on here. I've seen a couple of good questions pop up here. So,
Okay. I know Jesse's waiting in the wings and dying to get on. We got 2 more lure categories here. We'll just get through quickly, and then we'll bring Jessie out for some more commentary. Let's go on to, maybe one modification to show you on Susie's sucker. We'll talk about this color in a few minutes, but this is right out of my fall tackle box, my cold weather late in the year. I like to troll this on a short line at the side of the boat. And I'm a shallow water fisherman, 6 or 7 feet. And so just putting a blade and a weight on the front, again, just gets it down close to the boat. I control that nice and slow. I have the swim bait and I have the blade for nice modification. So cold water, this is a late season modification for me. On to the wobble and glide baits.
Yeah, the wobbles, it took me a bit to get used to working that, but once I started using the wobble myself, it really paid off on days where in the summertime where it had high skies and fish were very inactive. And I would just kind of pop it and bring it in slowly. And that erratic action seemed to shake stuff loose. And
that one.
Pardon me, Mike?
Slow is the key with that one.
Yes. Yeah, if you work it too fast, it's not going to produce for you. But you got to work it slow, like Mike was saying, and just kind of give it a pop, and it just seemed to be able to shake fish loose on those days where things were very inactive in the summertime for me.
I call this an idiot bait. Every guy needs an idiot bait, and it's nothing meant bad to our clients, but a lot of people, if there's a bait that people have trouble with, it's a walk the dog bait. It's getting that to go back and forth. And so this bait, instead of just being uniform side to side as a glide bait, and you can get it, to walk the dog well like that, it's got a real up and down component to it, a real erratic component to it. And so people that, when you want people, especially when fish are turned off, this bait, no matter who you give it to, if they pull it, it's got a really erratic action. And then that pause, it dives and moves around differently every single time. So whether you give it to an experienced fisherman to work it hard like a glide bait for that walk the dog action, or you give it to somebody who's brand new, they're still going to catch fish with it. It's an idiot bait. And me, I'm the head idiot. And so I like this bait. I use this bait a lot. Any other comments on glides?
Yeah, on that bait in particular, John, I remember we were out filming with you and you said, yeah, I give this bait to idiots because I can't work it. Here, you try it, Brent.
Yeah, usually you're in charge of all the humor. Occasionally I get a zinger in there too. So one for the good guy, and I'm probably losing about 10-1 on that day. Like always on the humor side. So
a bait that looks exactly the same as that, but it's not weighted, is the weagle. And another key element to that bait is working it slow as well, the surface bait.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
And that takes us on to our next category, with our last category. Before we bring you in, Jessie, so got 2 Suick options. We got, and it's a debate that we go through as guides. We got a prop bait and a walk the dog bait. And so, what are your thoughts on that, gang?
There's nothing like a topwater fish. I mean, come on, that's got to be my favorite way to catch a muskie for sure.
And are you a prop bait? Are you a prop bait advocate or a walk the dog advocate, Lisa?
Well, I love prop baits for guiding, especially just because, like you said, you can give it to someone with or without experience fishing muskies. They just work. Walking the dog, as you mentioned, there's a little bit of a skill to it at first. Once you get it, it's comfortable. There's nothing to it at all. And some baits do kick more easily than others, which is one of the reasons why that bait in particular works great.
I've been a prop bait guy most of my life, and for the reason, if you throw a walk the dog bait, you will have more action than the person that throws the prop bait for the day. But at the end of the day, I will have more pictures of muskies than you will, because muskies miss surface baits. Muskies miss surface baits more than any other baits. And so making it really simple, I encourage people to have a steady retrieve to make it as easy as possible for that fish. When you get a follow, you can speed it up. You know, sometimes you see that follow from a long ways off. Surface bait follows, again, just the craziest follows from that big wake in behind your bait, you know, just a thing of beauty to watch. And so, yeah, I've been a prop bait guy, but I gotta say, as my last number of years, I have gone back to walk the dog, just because that is finesse fishing, that is fun, that is easy. And again, you know, you're probably stirring more fish with that action. So.
Yeah, I really like to walk the dog bait. It's probably because I'm more active with my rod itself. And the strikes on them when they explode underneath are there's nothing like it. So
yeah.
But and the key with that with the Weagle again is working it slower, letting it do its thing. I find if you slow it down a bit, the fish will actually explode underneath. You'll get a lot more hookups than if you're working it fast.
It's pretty fun to see them cartwheel out of the water with one of those in their mouth.
Oh, I've seen them come like 4 feet out of the water, and it's crazy. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, Topwater, can't beat it for those strikes. And so we've made her wait long enough. What do you think? Bring Jessie Baker in?
Let's do it.
All right.
Hello.
Hey, Jessie.
Hey, Jess.
Welcome.
I get to walk in right at the Weagle conversation.
You do.
Mm-hmm.
We've been teasing them with your presence all show. Thanks for joining us. You want to start out? You've got a really terrific video that you and Doug made that just shows
Oh, one missed it. There it is. It's coming. Got it! Oh my God, oh my. Oh, that was sick. I literally stopped it.
Yeah.
15 feet out,
Yeah.
and it freaking turned around and, oh my God, it wanted that. How sweet.
Oh, that bite was ridiculous.
Oh man, that thing wanted it. That was a decent one. 42 incher.
I turned around to get the net behind me thinking I was in the back of the boat.
That was sick.
Yeah, it was all beat up from spawning.
I just can't believe that I let it sit and I let line
Yeah,
out.
I know. I saw that.
And then it was just sitting on top like that.
Yeah, and then one rip and it ate it.
Yeah. Haha, sweet. All beat up. Yeah, she's got some PTSD. Well, the new Suick works. What can I say, folks? Get your wallets out.
fantastic. I love that video for a lot of reasons. One, you're demonstrating all the things that we were talking about on the pause and on letting the bait rise up, and it fishes on its own. And then we talked about how muskies hit those baits in the head. That one was a little too far up on the head and even had a hold of the leader and didn't really have any hooks in it, it looked like, in it. So
yeah, I was actually working the bait pretty fast too. That was opening weekend and we were fishing kind of in like a shallow weed bed, but that was it was first day, so it was the first time I got to throw the new color Suicks I came out with that Mike helped me design. So I was pretty excited. I ended up actually catching that fish later on, like after dark, but yeah, I don't know what to say other than I'm a big Suick fan. That's why I'm here.
you caught that fish later in the day.
Yeah, actually, so we could tell because it had scars on its back. I caught it. I actually came in on a Weagle like right at dark, got right to the boat, and as we all know with Weagles, I ran out of real estate at the end. I didn't have anywhere else to go, so it definitely was interested, and so I actually threw like a rubber bait back at it and got it to eat. But it was like a couple days. No, not that evening. It was a couple days later, but it was in the same area. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
That's you catch muskies by hunting them and just seeing them the first time. A lot of times it's exciting and it's going back on a peak. It's going back at sunset, or it's going back 3 or 4 days later. You know,
Mhm.
they're
Yep.
probably still right where you saw them the first time. Fantastic.
Mhm.
Do you have the color? Do you have the baits that you and Mike came up with?
Yeah, so I actually went to Green Bay this spring and was lucky enough to go to the Suick factory. So here's my first color, which is called Portage Sucker. So I actually came to Mike, asked if he'd be interested in working on a custom color with me, and he thought it was cool enough to do it. So we did. And I literally drew these colors on a piece of paper and sent them to Mike, and then him and his team basically put them together. But this one's Portage Sucker, which is like a red and brown with gold. This is One Shot. And then this is the Pipestone Princess, which is me. So I just went with all my kind of favorite colors of multiple different baits that I like to throw that I didn't actually see a Suick color that was similar in. And so yeah, I am very fortunate to have these custom colors. I feel like I'm not even I'm a little I'm honored.
Terrific.
And they work, guys. So I'm just saying they work. You just saw.
So you pick those colors because they work in the type of water that you're fishing?
Yeah, so I fish multiple different types of water. I'm from Pipestone Lake, which if any of you know where that is or don't know, it's a deep, clear trout water. Like really big rock points and reefs and stuff like that. We don't fish a ton of weeds. And so Clearwater, I've always just done really good on purple and gold and black for some reason. I don't know what it's like, maybe the Cisco or whatever it is. That's our main bait fish is Cisco. So that's how I came up with Pipestone Princess. I also do really good on gold and red. And so that's kind of where I came out with Portage Sucker, but I also use that color on Lake of the Woods. It's been a really good color for me. So I actually, when we designed it, we put gold flakes all the way around it. Like someone had said earlier, obviously muskies hunt from below. So like the belly was really important to me. And I always, for some reason, I always go to first something that's really flashy, especially when it comes to a Suick, because you are getting so much action in the water. I really want it to stand out and kind of be like a nuisance. So that gold scale really did well. And so I put the gold scale also on the Pipestone Princess, and I did put it on this one there too. So that's like a big thing for me is I really want it to stand out in the water with that flash.
Wow. Interesting points, especially is that the first gold colored belly on a Suick that you've ever had, Mike?
There hasn't been very many. It's one of them.
Because as a guy who's been using Suicks for a long time, I used to pick baits based on belly color. So there's your standard white belly, there's an orange belly, there's yellow belly. Those are the three prominent colors of bellies in the old days. And so it was one of those three that was going to be the go-to lure for the day. And so, you know, finding out what it was all based on belly color. I happen to love gold as well. It works really well on the Ottawa River, Jessie. So we'll have to talk to Mike and see if he'll sell us one of those after. Maybe we can catch some fish up here on it. Thoughts? What are your thoughts on sunny versus cloudy days?
So honestly, I don't really pick my bait, like my Suick, especially based on what the weather is that day. I more so base it on the body of water I'm fishing on. I like I said, I always go for something that's shiny. If I find like a Suick is just a known bait. Doug always says this too, because when I fish the front of the boat, if I'm throwing a Suick, he's whining in the back. I'm not going to get it in fish because you got the Suick in the front. But you always generally move fish on Suicks, right? It's just a bait that if you definitely aren't seeing fish, I always try to put one on. So for some reason, you know, like I said, I go for shiny. If for some reason that's not working or I'm not moving fish, then I'll go to like just a flat black. Sometimes a flat black with the orange tip tail. only if I'm not seeing something on that, something that has a little bit of flash. So, I mean, stained water, I would fish. I actually have this bait. This is, if anyone's watched Doug's YouTube, this is like what you see me throwing all the time, the bronze perch, because this is just, it is like, if you're going to Lake of the Woods and you don't have one of these, just add it to the cart, because this bait, this color has caught me so many fish. I literally caught 3 fish in one spot on the way around on that bait. I think just because of stained water, obviously it's very stereotypical to just go for something that's a lot brighter that you can see. Whereas clear water, you're kind of going for something more natural, mimicking, the bait fish and stuff like that. That's why I think I really liked the Portage sucker for Lake of the Woods too, because that gold is shiny. I mean, I'm assuming you guys are fishing pretty stained water too. I base my Suick choice and my color choice on body of water, not necessarily if it's sunny or if it's cloudy.
Okay, I think that color that you just held up is Lisa's favorite color as well. Is that your go-to out in the boat, Lisa?
I do love the bronze perch. Yeah, I do have a Frankie in that. I also love that Nighthawk. The orange belly. Orange just works on the Ottawa and the stained tan water. It's probably my ultimate favorite for sure.
Yeah, I've used that a lot more since Mr. Bocek introduced us to that a number of years ago.
Yep.
I just want to mention to Mike that I actually don't have a brown perch.
You don't have one?
Or a brown perch.
About that, Brent?
Sorry, what was that?
I said we might have to do something about that.
I think so. I actually wrote it down here so I won't forget.
There's a question here, Mike or Jessie. Where can one pick up your custom color Suick?
Yeah, so we did them exclusively to Thorn Brothers, which is another company that I work with and I'm really good friends with. We also are working on getting them into Lake of the Woods sports headquarters in Canada, so people have the opportunity to buy them here. But those are the 2 places that you can get them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Just more talk on color. I wanted to just tell this story. We have really dynamic water on the Ottawa River. We have tannic water, so a natural brown stain to it. We have visibility that varies between 0 when it's muddied up after storms and probably about 7 feet at the greatest, which is why we catch so many fish at the side of the boat. People don't see the fish and people don't panic when they see the fish. They just concentrate on a good finish, and so that works well. So I had a guest show up from New Jersey, Rob Gabrielle, and he brought this bait here, which again is the gold, and the gold scales on the side with orange and an orange belly. And this was his go-to in the sunshine. And so it took about 3 years of Rob bringing this bait up and catching fish every year that he brought it up in the bright sunshine out on the lake before the pea fell in the slot. And I thought I should probably get one of those as well. And so since that time, this has been my go-to I call it my sunshine Suick. So on a day of bright sunshine, blue skies, high pressure, when your fish are neutral in a best case and often in a negative mood, this particular color is an absolute go-to for us around here. So again, the gold, it seems like we all really like the gold.
That's actually a great color on Lake of the Woods too. I would put that in the same category as the bronze perch, honestly.
All right. Go-to color for me, what I start with, if you're only going to have one, it's the natural sucker pattern. When I got to fish with Pete Mena and film his show a number of years ago, we were talking colors, and Pete said, just about everything that a muskie eats has white on it, John. Yeah, it does. And so, just about everything that we're out there that's appealing to a muskie has got a white belly. And so the white belly is absolutely the go-to. When I started fishing in the 70s, the all black lure was the key. The all black Suick was what people had. And so I don't see that as common. Everybody's got their colors, but that all black Suick, there you go. and it just beat up, tooth marks all over the top, hook rash
Yep.
on the sides, and that does the trick.
That bait's over 30 years old. And it's got a special place hanging in the basement now.
You were just a kid back then.
Actually, it's probably 30. Geez, that bait's almost 40 years old, that bait.
Everything's further back than we thought about.
We got a couple questions on the same topic here, so I think we should dive into this a little bit about sizing of Suicks or thrillers and when you'd use a smaller one versus a larger one. Jessie?
Yeah, I mean, I probably am not the right person to ask because I love to throw big Suicks. Like I probably throw the most a 12-inch Suick, always weighted, sometimes, double or triple weighted, just because I'm fishing a lot of, deeper water. I will switch to a 10-inch if I'm fishing something a little bit shallower or I'm not, seeing as many fish, or not even seeing as many fish, getting as many fish to bite on a 12-inch Suick. I'll downsize a little bit, or vice versa. But yeah, 12-inch Suick for me, I don't know. I'm always throwing something big, I guess.
Big fish eat big baits, and so
yeah, I mean anything. I caught the first fish I caught was like a 36-incher on a 12-inch Suick. So I don't think that they discriminate against size. So hey, I'm not gonna argue with them. If they're gonna eat it, I'm gonna throw it.
well, I think you and Lisa are pretty much the same. And Lisa, you're a Franken Suick enthusiast.
Yeah, and funnily enough, this one still blows my mind. The smallest muskie that was ever in my boat, I believe it was just over 20 inches, ate a 14-inch Franken Suick. And a lot of people have or go big in the fall, especially. They're throwing these huge baits. But one of my biggest fish this year actually came on the 9-inch Suick at the end of the year. Now at that point though, I'm in fishing really shallow in the fall at that point. And if I'm using the Frankie, I'm usually out, like Jessie mentioned, a little bit deeper on the drop off or the edge.
Mm-hmm.
What about Franken Suicks in the spring? You like those? You like the big baits in the spring?
I do, yeah. For me, you could literally throw that Franken Suick year round and you're going to catch fish on it. I'm usually shallower in the spring too, so for me, I'm using the smaller ones. But there's always fish on the drops, so like I said, it's really versatile, and you can work it at a lot of different depths because of the staggered weight system or customizable weight system. There are times I'll work it down, down as far as 8 feet, which in the fall is really great. And then, like you said, shorter poles will actually help keep the bait up higher. Longer poles will get it down lower.
Yeah.
Maybe differentiating when to go to short lures, smaller lures, tougher conditions. If you're not seeing anything, no matter what you're trying, you're not moving fish and getting them to go. That smaller presentation is sometimes the key. It's an easier meal for a fish, and that might get them up off the bottom and get them engaged.
I personally have no problem throwing a big bait in June. We call it in springtime in June. And that 2 years back, I did a presentation for the Kawartha chapter online, and talking about you don't have to downsize your baits in the spring. You can throw the bigger baits because those fish will still eat bigger baits in the spring. They're still eating walleyes or perch or catfish or whatever. And a week later, I went out on the Franken Suick. I got a mid 40-inch fish. So just to prove myself right. But a wise man once told me that a muskie is quite capable and comfortable of eating a bait 2/3 of its size. So that being said, I throw a lot of 10-inch baits because you can't throw a 14-inch one all day long.
Mike, what's your favorite Suick?
I use a lot of 10-inch weighted myself. I like the 10-inch weighted, and that color you had there was called, the stock number is V, so we call it a V. Or the sucker, bronze perch. Those three are probably my go-to.
All right.
I think it's a lot more like instead of size, I find it's more kind of like how you're working your bait. Sometimes you really the thing about throwing Suicks is like you really have to read fish behavior, especially when you get them to the boats. Like, how are they reacting? Like when that one, I reeled really fast in that video, almost like I was going to bring it in. and then I totally let my Suick float and hit the surface, which I've kind of like teetered back and forth if I'm supposed to do that. I've talked to people, and it's like it's all about in the moment reading the fish. Every fish reacts differently. So like if you're seeing fish, you know, and you can't get them to bite or something, I more so look to change up the way that I'm working the Suick rather than the size of the Suick. But I definitely agree if they're not biting it and, you know, you're getting them to go around and around and around, I always kind of downsize if that's been the most successful for me.
All right. Lisa, you said there were a couple questions. Do you have another one handy?
We do. We did touch on this one a little bit last week, but I think it's a really good question. And I'd like to get Jessie's thoughts as well, as far as the leader choice for throwing wire versus fluorocarbon.
Yeah, so I actually throw my 49 strand. I'm terrified of throwing fluorocarbon just because I got bit off once, and so I kind of steer away from that. I do like the 49 strand or a fluorocarbon, whatever you're comfortable with, in just because you do have a little bit more movement. That's just my personal preference with it.
What weight was the fluorocarbon that got bit?
It was like 100 pound or something. A fish come and totally missed. I was throwing a rubber bait, missed it, and just bit right through it. And my double dog just sank to the bottom. And I thought, oh shit, if it's gonna bite through that, I don't even want to mess around. But it could have been like a fluky leader or something. I'm superstitious, so I'm moving on.
Yeah, you lose one muskie. That's one too many. So you got to make some adjustments. When fluorocarbon leaders were brand new, I watched people with 100 pound was common back then. I watched somebody get bit off on. I've seen it a couple times. Get bit off on the 100. So we make leaders and sell them through our company. We make 175 pound. Fluoro, and so we haven't had a fail on one of those. So 100, those musky teeth, they've got a razor on one side. They can cut through that. Absolutely. On 175s, 150, 175, kind of a minimum to go to. So if you like fluoro, and I'm a fluoro for everything kind of person, 175 is where you want to go.
What do you prefer, Mike?
That's my personal preference. I prefer a solid wire leader. Especially for Suicks. To me, I think that you get the most action, I feel, out of that because you have almost more of a hinge between the bait and the leader versus it all moving at the same time. So I think it helps your side-to-side action a little bit, but it's just my opinion.
Right.
Jessie or Mike, what do you guys have at the end of your leader? Do you have a split ring or do you have the clasp?
I have Stay-Lock Snap.
Stay-Locks?
Yeah.
I like Stay-Locks as well. All the hardcores like the split rings though. So yeah, I appreciate it.
I've been trained and tortured in the boat to just do what I'm told. So I have a split ring on every different bait and I just do what I'm told, and now I tell other people what to do. So
right.
You know what's funny? I've always been a Stay-Lock guy. And then I watched a video from when I was working out in the garage, one of Doug's videos on the TV out in the garage one day, and about, use them enough they can actually break. Mm-hmm. The next day I'm on the water and I freaking broke one. And I've never done that before until I seen that video. So now it's got me thinking.
Yeah, you got to switch them out. If you're going to use snaps, you got to switch them out.
Yeah, once the paint comes off, you got to switch it.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point, everybody. Yeah, they are not an eternal use leaders. You gotta swap the parts out. Every fish is so valuable to us, and just missing one is a heartbreak. You remember the ones you catch, but the ones you lose, you remember years later. Years later. So you don't want to do that. Lisa, what do you got for question?
Most of them we kind of already touched on pretty well. So yeah. One question that I can see here is somebody asking about a prop bait going into a figure 8 on it. Do you go underwater with it?
I personally
never do. Nope. I never do. Only if a fish isn't biting, I do that, but that's just how I think everyone does it differently.
I always make at least one move at the boat. If I got to follow, I'll keep going, and then if if the fish doesn't engage, then I'll go down in the water with it for sure. Because the fish doesn't know that it's a prop bait. He just knows that it's something that he wants to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I kind of like that trail of bubbles it leaves when you do that.
Yes. Yep.
I always dive the bait at the side of the boat, and there's kind of a difference between northern Ontario and maybe Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois area. I know a lot of people that I see in older videos, Dick Pearson videos, that sort of thing, that the bait stays on the surface and the fish ends up eating it like that. Out here in the East, I think probably more people bring that bait in and dive it. And so, and that's mimicking a fish that's being chased by a muskie does generally one of two things. It goes to the bottom or it comes to the surface and is jumping out. And so, kind of mimicking a little bit of that. That's sort of our thought process. East versus West, both are good. Both are good. You got to figure it out on your own.
The key is to engage the fish, right? Once it follows in, is to engage it and get and do something so that it eats your bait.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and you had it coming in on a surface bait, and so change of direction, change of speeds is probably the first step in a figure eight in your figure eight motion, and then you'll introduce speed and depth and bigger circles and a bigger area that you're using. If the fish is still there and you're still trying to entice it. So, yeah, up your game the longer you're playing with that fish. Team, I think if we want to keep our video to a reasonable length, and I know the five of us could sit and talk for hours, but probably we should look at winding things down at this point. And so that would mean talking about where Suick is going to be next. You're going to be on the show circuit. This is a busy show season for you, Mike. It's one show after another. So,
yep.
Milwaukee Muskie Expo, February 14th to 16th. All right. That's the next place that you can find Suick's. Find Mike and the booth at a show. We will have our next show on first Monday in March, and we will have a special guest, Brent.
We're gonna have Glenn McDonald on in March, and Glenn he has a podcast, 54 or Bust, and he's also, I know he's got a few favorite Suicks that he likes to throw, and there's a little bit of history there with the tackle shop that they have up there.
I'll tell you how I used to save all my money as a kid for going across the country, and about 1,300 miles east of where I am, there was the Vermilion Bay bait shop. And so it was the only place that was just wall-to-wall musky lures. It wasn't anything like that as a kid. And so I will save all your money and spend it all in that store on the way up to Menaki. So we'll look forward to seeing Glenn. What about, do we have a video that, or a card that shows where you can find us? Canadian Muskie Odyssey, March 8th in Burlington, Ontario. This is the biggest muskie event in Canada. It's a place I first met Jessie a number of years ago. The event was in Bowmanville at that time. March 8th, wall-to-wall muskie, wall-to-wall everything muskie. I think there's 50 different anglers displaying their wares, guides, tackle manufacturers. There's a whole seminar series. I'll be on the big fish panel late in the day in that show as well. So hope to see you all there. The Ottawa Boat Show coming up for Lisa and I on February 20, 21, 22, and 23. I'll be on stage on the 21st and 22nd. Come and say hi. Lisa will be on stage for that on the 23rd. Hopefully we'll see you there. Jessie, you got any shows coming up?
Nope. The only show I'm going to this year is the Minnesota Muskie Expo, which I've never been to before, so I'm pretty excited to do that.
All right. Serious people at that show. You will have a good time. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. If you want to follow our social media, you can have a look at this. come back and catch it. That's everything that we put out there. Jessie, phenomenal producer of social media, great videos, along with her partner, Doug Wagner, just educational stuff. And so that's the purpose of why we're here, is hopefully to pass on something that will help you all catch more muskies in the season coming up. That and because it's just a good time for us talking muskie this time of year. So a pleasure, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We'll look forward to seeing you first Monday in March at the third event of the Suick Seminar Series.
Thanks for tuning.